This is the third installment of iFishiBelong's 2025 Be What You Don't See campaign. And our goal here is really to highlight folks within the fishing industry, whether they're guides or activists, biologists, and really just showcase how these folks are breaking through the barriers that they're encountering in their various industries. I'm Ali Valdatara. I am on the board of iFishiBelong. I'm here with Anna Lay from Grayling Education. Let's start with the important stuff. How are your tank of shrimp doing?
My shrimps are thriving now. My partner, for those of you who don't know, for a while I've been wanting freshwater shrimps for pets. And last May, my partner got me a 10-gallon fish tank. And then it took about 7 months to get it started and up and running. And for Valentine's Day, he got me a bunch of freshwater shrimps. And then the first week, there was a massive die off just because I think it was a new shrimp tank, like a new tank swim jump is what it's called. But right now it's like thriving. It's a whole ecosystem. I wish we could just spend the next 30 minutes of me just giving you all a tour because I would flip this camera so quickly and just walk out here and show you all the shrimps and its aquascape and all the plants in it. But maybe that can be like another day, like a follow-up.
The next installment, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
shrimp tour.
yeah, I'm gonna do like a shrimp tour and like an ASMR voiceover kind of deal. Yeah.
Yeah, say less, absolutely. Yeah, I'll pitch it to Heather. We'll get that going.
Okay.
So, points I want to talk about, and like kind of what ties back to I Fish I Belong's campaign, our mission, and a lot of the work that you. Ooh, we have a question, Anna. What ages do you work with?
I primarily work with adults, and sometimes with teenagers too, with adults or parents bringing them to the workshops. And so, yeah, I taught like a fly fishing workshop a few weeks ago that had 4-year-olds, and I think that was a little too young for fly fishing. And so, yeah, definitely a lot more adults and teenagers for sure.
Actually, that's a great question. I want to talk a little bit before we pivot to more of the inclusion side of the house, but like, what other offerings? Like, what are some of your offerings? What do you spend your time doing?
Yeah, so I do some like environmental education consulting services. So that means if you have like an organization or a group that you want to just some sort of a different insight or perspective on your programming. I do a lot of like auditing with that, curriculum writing as well. So a lot of folks are coming to me of like, hey, I want to do this. How can I do it better or work with these specific groups? I'll give insight on that as well. Let's see. Another one is like outreach and educational materials creation. So I have a full, beautiful team of really talented women who can do like Spanish translations and beautiful graphic designs that make education a lot more accessible and reachable and equitable for people to understand, especially when it comes to science and science jargon. And then with Grayling, more of the workshop side, it's a lot of like science and conservation and education that's all interdisciplinary. So it could be like wildlife photography, but also learning about wildlife and habitat and like fly fishing or intro to fly fishing. And it's going to be like macroinvertebrates and water quality. So looking at hobbies in the outdoors, but connecting it back into science and education.
Anna, maybe you could walk us through, your origin story, what led you to create Grayling Education, and I'd be interested in knowing, like, was there a specific moment in that journey when you realized, like, okay, maybe there's a better way that we could be doing this?
Let's see here. Where do I even start? So I guess I've spent like the last 10 years now working as a fisheries biologist. So that's like my formal background is fisheries biologist, environmental educator. I was like bopping around all over like Oregon, Colorado, Montana, just doing like seasonal field tech jobs. And it just got to the point where I was moving like 5 to 6 times a year and just like picking up, saying goodbye to my friends, going to a new beautiful place, and then just being like, oh, my contract's done. I got to move on with my life. And yeah, once I landed into Portland, I realized that there was just this like constant perpetual culture that was happening at these certain nonprofits or even governmental agencies that felt like it shouldn't be hard to do and create a culture that I want to see out there. And so, yeah, I guess the origin story was that, in 2021, I got diagnosed with PTSD. And during that journey, it was really, really hard to like go out and do anything. And my love for like interacting with people in the outdoors just kind of like dimmed and simmered away just because it just felt hard when you're in that position to like want to do anything and be yourself. And so was really taking care of myself since 2021. But during that year of like really intense therapy and just like self-care and like trying to get back into the world, I like pushed myself to go and like have a goal of like catching my first grayling. And so at that time I was living in Montana and I was just like, I want to catch a grayling. It shouldn't be that hard. And I had people and friends and community who are just like, I'll take you to go catch a grayling. And I was like, okay, cool. And I was just like, I should be able to catch a grayling or even snorkel for one. I do a little bit of river snorkeling. So like
In Montana, you were river snorkeling?
yeah, in Montana I was river snorkeling.
Follow-up questions there, but we keep going.
Yeah, and then yeah, I had a friend who took me to this lake and yeah, it was full like stocked full of grayling and I was just like I don't need it to be like a wild or a native grayling. I just need to see one. It took me 3 years to finally catch one. And Shelby, who's also a part of iFishiBelong, she came out with me one morning and the day before her and I went out, I had a friend take me out to this one part of Yellowstone National Park that had grayling and also West Slope cutthroat. My friend hooked up everything with like grayling and I hooked up nothing but West Slope cutthroat. And I was just like, oh my God, this isn't meant to be. There's like something, and like folks might not believe in signs or whatever it is. But the next day I like asked Shelby to come out with me that morning and I put on a parachute at him. I like casted like the crappiest cast you would ever see out there. And it just like stuck in this like pool of water in this culvert. And I was just like, oh my God, what am I doing right now? Like, this is not meant to be. There's like overcast and rain's about to come in. And I was just like, hey, Shelby, like, I'm going to cast again. And right when I like pulled up the rod to recast, a fish jumped out and took my dry fly. And it turned out to be a grayling netted by Shelby, which is like one of my favorite memories. And I think that was the moment where I'm like, okay, took me 3 years to catch a grayling. It took me 3 years to finally like heal or recover or learn how to live with my PTSD and intense anxiety. Maybe this is the time to kind of jumpstart Grayling Education and create a work culture and also like a community that I want to see thriving in this like conservation and education.
I love that story. I love that it's like a whole 3-year journey. You go to all these beautiful places trying to catch a grayling, and then you find a grayling and a culvert on the side of the road, and like that's the grayling origin. Not like I was in this majestic place in like the middle of nowhere, Alaska, mountains everywhere, and it was so beautiful. No, culvert, side of the road. It happens like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So it was like very much like what healing from PTSD felt like. It just felt like catching the most beautiful fish and a non-picturesque side of the road culverts.
I'm really glad you told that story. That like that is true. Like one of my favorite origin stories for like any one of these organizations or initiatives. So we kind of have your like here's why I started it. Have you since then? Now we're what 3-4 years later. Have you had that moment in your journey with Grayling where you're like, okay, this is it. Like this is why I started it. Like this is why I did Grayling. Like this is it. Like your I've made it moment.
Maybe I still haven't had that like I made it moment. I'm still waiting for that like breakout. I don't know if like have people watched like heard have you heard that podcast how it's made with Guy Raz? Yeah, so I'm like waiting for that big breakout story. I think I'm still in that like first few years of struggling and building story of like how to become an entrepreneur. But I think my favorite moment so far is I've been doing a lot of workshops and outings with a lot of people throughout the Portland metro area and also and sometimes in Seattle too. And a lot of those outings consist of just like conservation and fun and art and like community building. And these are just like random people that I might be able to hang out with for like 2 hours. But there was this moment where last August, I led like a intro to wildlife photography course, and we did like a 2 hour hike doing like birding and pulling out the apps to like show people how to like listen to birds and identify birds by bird calls and species and like how to take a photo with your phone to not like scare them off or anything. And so it was very much tied with like learning about the environment and the habitat and the species to be able to capture the moment, right? So that's what I do with like fly fishing too, is like learning about the species, the habitat to be able to catch the fish itself. Less so like emphasis on the gear or anything like that. Yeah, I remember there was this couple that came out, and it was like who are my parents' age, and they went out just like so excited. And they're just like, oh my gosh, I have like tools to use now, and I'm like into like I'm newer to birding, but I'm looking forward to getting into it and using my camera a little bit more. I had another workshop in November that they also signed up for. And, from August to November, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's you guys again. And they like come up and they're just like, oh, that's so cool. Like I went to Georgia to visit my daughter and I pulled out this app and I have like a new bird. And I also learned how to identify like 10 new species. And like they went from like a few months of being a beginner to like coming back to my workshop to be like, this is what I learned since I last like got in contact with you. So I think because I rarely have people coming back to me, having that couple coming back and just like telling me what they've learned, me being able to introduce them to like a new hobby or like a recreation conservation was like really beautiful, because I'm like, oh, like we didn't stay in touch, but you like came back because I was leading this workshop and you were able to learn something and continue to learn, to come back and then sharing it with other people. So I think I remember coming home and I was just like, okay, I can do this. Like I can continue teaching people and being out here if it's just people having some sort of spark and inspiration and just continuing on with that.
Well, I think there's something super special about when you get to share something that you're incredibly passionate about with other people. And then, like, if you feel that stoke reverberate from them, I think that's like an incredibly important moment. Like, maybe not your, like, they're going to do a podcast about you moment, but at least, like, you get to take a step back and be like, I had a part in this person's journey, and, like, them finding their passion and finding something that they love equally as much as I do. And I think that's incredible, and it's a great story. So you have your "this is why I do this" moment. You have plenty of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of them, but there's not this whole like, aha, like this is why I keep going with it. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out. I'm like hoping for like a really grand success story sooner rather than later. Where like Guy Raz invites me on and is like, so tell me, how did you come up with this idea? And you created this empire of
Mm-hmm.
successes and trials and tribulations. That's what I'm waiting for.
So you want something like very theatrical? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'm in this. Like, have you seen La La Land?
I have not.
Okay. I don't know what else to relate it to right now.
Oh, we've fallen dead now with the La La
Yeah,
Land.
it's like, oh, you've never seen La La Land. I don't know what to talk to you about anymore. Just
I'm
kidding.
sorry. There's too much singing. No, thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, for those who've seen it, I feel like I'm just like the Emma Stone at the very beginning of the movie, where she's like trying to get her footing into Hollywood and become this like big known actress. And so I think this is where Grayling is like the auditions, the marketing aspect, and then yeah, hopefully it takes off and yeah, has that big aha moment.
Well, speaking of taking off, like for those, like for folks that would want to get involved and kind of like be along for the journey, like how can people support Grayling and all of these like initiatives and projects you have going, and where can they connect to get information, like know what you're up to?
Yeah, Grayling Education. For those of you who want to support and are interested in any workshops or even collaborative opportunities, I love working with people and organizations. You can connect with me over on this account, my personal account, Grayling Education, which is the Instagram account, or even over my website at graylingeducation.com. Grayling with an A, not an E, so it's spelled exactly like the fish.
You mentioned something earlier that I also love. One of my favorite things about fishing with you is that you bring the fish biologist approach to fly fishing, whereas I am coming from a strictly angling background. So
Mhm.
I incredibly interesting to hear you talk about like the river ecosystem, and that's how you pick your flies, and that's how you know what's like going on around, and like that's your success story for fishing, right? Like I think it's interesting when you have two folks with a common goal coming from like two very different perspectives. And I think as women in angling, right, like we have certain barriers that we've encountered, and I'm sure the ones that you have encountered are very different from my perspective. So with your journey with Grayling, and even like you as an individual Annalee, like what barriers have you experienced in like in your industry, in fly fishing or angling in general? Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely changed. That's a great question. And you're such a great interviewer, by the way. You have like a very radio voice. I know. I think you know that yourself. I would have to say, like starting off in this career, it was really, I remember it being really, really, really hard to break into the industry. I was like one out of like very few women in my cohort in undergrad at the time being like fisheries and wildlife biologist because it is super niche. And like when you're working in like a government agency, you're most likely going to have like male crew leaders or male supervisors. And if you have female supervisors, they're going to be like the most badass women you're ever going to meet in your entire life because they got that position for a reason. But yeah, there is definitely an inequity when it comes to gender and who's represented. And also, I think that definitely does play a role in the career because working with more like female supervisors, there's just a lot more empathy that goes into like the field work and being able to take care of yourself and being able to advocate for yourself in a very vulnerable position. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's just so important as like someone who's like an early career biologist. I definitely had male supervisors and role models that like definitely create a safe space. There is like representation is just super important, and I think like connects with like too. And I definitely have been fortunate to have some really incredible like supervisors in my life that have molded this beautiful culture that I want to keep maintaining and doing that in Grayling Education itself too. I guess some other barriers is just like barrier to entry, right? So talking about the costs and like how to even get into this career can be like such a big upfront cost that may or may not have a payout realistically. And I just don't think people talk about that enough. Of I feel like with social media nowadays, this career is just so like glorified and field work is so nice and awesome until you're like actually in it and gaining $14 an hour, something like that, and paid thousands of dollars for your undergrad career in something super niche. And like nothing is ever promised, right? And so I think those are some of the barriers that definitely have affected this career and this pathway. Also, just like prejudice too. I've had a lot of places that I've moved to, like rural areas that may not have the nicest of individuals or just like differences in opinions and perspectives, which is totally fair and expected, but that can just create like a very like unsafe environment to work in. And I've had multiple times with encounters with individuals that I'm like, oh, this will make or break my career choice for sure because I feel unsafe and I don't know how long I can do with this. So yeah, going back into that vulnerable position where having that supervisor can really make or break that experience for you for sure.
Yeah. I mean that all makes sense. And I mean if you're someone that is a little bit more nascent in your field, right? Like what would you tell that individual that's like maybe on the fence about heading down this path?
Mm, That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. I would say I were talking to my younger version of Anna back in the day at like 17 or 18 years old. I was a very fortunate individual where I like knew exactly what I wanted to do and how to do it and had like opportunities to get into the place where I'm at right now. And I know a lot of people are starting out later or like don't know exactly what they want to do at 18, which is completely fine. I would have to say just like be realistic with both the pros and cons. And I know, like back in the day, I was always looking at the pros of things, of like, oh, I get to be out in the field every day, and I get to work with fish and water, and be a badass biologist. Even in the classes that you're taking when you're starting out, they'll tell you all about the pros and the careers you can get, and the money, amount of money you can make, but they don't really tell you what comes from it. And I wish I had learned about that a little bit more so I can make a more informed decision just based on how realistic I'm moving every few years first starting out, right? Like I was just not forming communities or saying goodbye to my friends every few months just because I had to like move, pick up and leave for a job that I really love to do, right? And, for a lot of people that might not be worth it. And I just wish they knew more about what they were getting into before they made the decision to do something super niche.
I agree. I feel like that's a pervasive theme, right? Like even in angling, right? You highlight all the pros and the positives, and that's kind of what glorified, but no one really talks about the other side of the coin there. So
Mhm.
I agree. I think it's incredibly important to not just glamorize something, but make sure like you have a full picture and you see both sides there. It's not all, rainbows and butterflies.
For sure. Yeah. And it was just kind of like I've had so many like early career biologists come to me and be like, I want to do field biology for the rest of my life. And, it's completely like doable. Absolutely. I have so many friends who are like in their 70s who are supervisory positions who are still doing field work every day. Right. But realistically, that was hard for me to come into terms in 2021 with like severe PTSD where my body just started breaking down on me, where I'm like, oh crap, like I physically cannot do as an intensive a field work as I did in my earlier 20s, right? And at that point, I was only like 25 or 26. So still pretty young, but it was really hard to just come in terms with it of like, oh, your body just can't physically keep up all the time. And you're just going to have to be okay with that. And it might be time to transition.